The forest held its breath as if waiting for something or someone. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, a palpable sense of foreboding that seemed to seep from the very ground. Twisted branches, like skeletal fingers, clawed at the twilight sky. They seemed to move of their own accord, whispering secrets to the wind, secrets that were never meant for human ears. Anya pushed through the undergrowth, each step a whispered prayer. Her heart pounded in her chest, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the urgency of her flight. She could feel the forest watching her, its unseen eyes tracking her every move. The trees pressed closer, their shadows stretching towards her like grasping hands. Each shadow seemed to have a life of its own, reaching out to ensnare her, to pull her into the darkness. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. It was a scent that clung to her skin, a reminder of the forest's ancient, unyielding presence. The ground beneath her feet was soft and treacherous, each step sinking slightly into the moist earth. Strange sounds filtered through the woods, a twig snapping, a low growl, a whisper of movement just beyond sight. These sounds seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, adding to the sense of disorientation that gripped her. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced Anya's heart. It was a fear that went beyond the physical, a primal terror that gnawed at her very soul. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, each one a struggle against the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She dared not slow down. The forest seemed to close in around her, each step forward a battle against the encroaching darkness. She could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on her, a suffocating presence that urged her to keep moving. Deeper she went, the forest floor a treacherous carpet of tangled roots and rotting leaves. Each step was a gamble, a test of her balance and resolve. The roots seemed to reach out to trip her, the leaves hiding unseen dangers beneath their decaying surface. The last sliver of sunlight vanished, swallowed by the dense canopy above. The darkness was complete, an all-encompassing void that left her blind and vulnerable. She could no longer see the path ahead, relying solely on her instincts to guide her. Anya stumbled onward, driven by a desperate hope that she might yet escape this place. Her legs ached, her lungs burned, but she could not stop. The forest whispered around her, its voice a constant reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. She had to keep moving, had to find a way out before the forest claimed her as its own. A shape emerged from the gloom. Low and squat, it perched on grotesque chicken legs, its silhouette stark against the dying light. Anya froze, her breath catching in her throat. The hut. She had found Baba Yaga's hut. A rickety fence formed from the bleached bones of countless creatures encircled the dwelling. Skulls, their empty sockets staring blindly, adorned the top of each post. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable aura of menace that sent shivers down Anya's spine. A low groan emanated from the hut, the sound of wood straining against some unnatural force. The chicken legs shifted, the hut turning slowly as if watching her. Anya's hand went to her mouth, stifling a cry of terror. Anya had not meant to stray this far. She had wandered into the woods at dusk, seeking a shortcut back to her village. But the forest paths were cunning, twisting and turning, leading her further and further astray. Now, lost and alone, she stood before the dwelling of legend. Baba Yaga, the bone-legged hag, the eater of children. Stories whispered around hearths, meant to frighten disobedient children. But Anya knew deep down that the stories were true. She had to get away, turn back and run. But her feet felt rooted to the spot, her body paralyzed by fear. The hut beckoned, its windows glowing with an eerie internal light. The door creaked open as if inviting her in. The sound echoed through the still night, sending shivers down her spine. It was as if the very air around her was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. Anya hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs. She could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on her, the unknown dangers lurking just beyond her sight. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run as far away as possible. She told herself to run, to flee back into the darkness of the woods. The forest, though menacing, seemed a safer bet compared to the ominous hut. But her feet felt rooted to the spot, as if the ground itself was holding her in place. But an unseen force seemed to draw her closer. It was as if invisible hands were gently pushing her forward, urging her to step inside. The pull was irresistible, a magnetic force that she couldn't fight. The interior of the hut was a swirling chaos of strange and unsettling objects. Shadows danced on the walls, creating eerie shapes that seemed to move of their own accord. The room was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. Bones of all shapes and sizes littered the shelves, each one telling a story of its own. Some were small and delicate, while others were large and imposing, hinting at the creatures they once belonged to. Alongside jars filled with unidentifiable ingredients. The contents of the jars were murky and strange, some glowing faintly in the dim light. What dark potions or spells were they meant for? A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The flames seemed to dance to a rhythm of their own, creating an almost hypnotic effect. The air hung heavy with the scent of smoke and something sickly sweet. It was a smell that made her stomach churn, a mix of decay and something else she couldn't quite place. In the center of the room sat a cauldron, bubbling ominously over the flames. The liquid inside was thick and green, sending up occasional plumes of steam that added to the room's oppressive atmosphere. Anya's stomach churned at the sight of the thick, green stew within. The concoction looked vile, and the thought of what might be in it made her feel even more nauseated. What unspeakable ingredients went into its making? She couldn't even begin to imagine. The hut was a place of dark magic, and she was now caught in its sinister embrace. Section 5. The Slithering, Crawling Things. A chittering sound echoed from the corner, sending a shiver down Anya's spine. The noise was unlike anything she had ever heard before, a mix of high-pitched squeaks and low, guttural growls. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, whispering secrets and threats in a language only the shadows understood. Anya whirled around, her eyes widening in horror. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum. She could feel the cold sweat forming on her forehead, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing in as if trying to suffocate her. Rats, their eyes glowing red in the firelight, scurried across the floor. They moved with an unnatural speed, their tiny claws clicking against the wooden boards. Anya could see their sharp teeth glinting in the dim light, their whiskers twitching as they sniffed the air. The sight of them made her stomach churn, a wave of nausea washing over her. But these were no ordinary rats. They were larger, their fur matted and dirty, their eyes filled with a malevolent intelligence. It was as if they were watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Anya could feel their gaze on her, a cold, calculating stare that sent chills down her spine. They were larger, their teeth bared in grotesque grins. Their mouths seemed to stretch impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. Anya could hear their chittering laughter, a sound that seemed to mock her fear. She took a step back, her foot catching on a loose floorboard. And then she saw the spiders. They were everywhere, crawling on the walls, emerging from the shadows. Their legs moved with a slow, deliberate grace, each step sending a shiver down Anya's spine. She could see their eyes glinting in the darkness, tiny pinpricks of light that seemed to follow her every move. Hundreds of them, their webs draped across every surface. The cobwebs were thick and sticky, clinging to everything they touched. Anya could see the spiders moving through the webs, their bodies glistening in the dim light. The sight of them made her skin crawl, a feeling of revulsion washing over her. They were not the small, harmless creatures she knew. These were monstrous things, their bodies bloated and hairy, their legs long and spindly. Anya could see the venom dripping from their fangs, a clear, viscous liquid that glistened in the light. The sight of it made her heart race, a feeling of dread settling in her stomach. These were monstrous things, their hairy legs as thick as her fingers. Each leg was covered in tiny, bristling hairs that seemed to move on their own. Anya could see the muscles rippling beneath their exoskeletons, a testament to their strength. She took a step back, her foot slipping on the slick floor. A cold sweat broke out on Anya's skin. She could feel the sweat trickling down her back, her clothes sticking to her skin. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. The room seemed to spin around her, the walls closing in as if trying to suffocate her. She could feel the spiders' eyes on her, their gaze heavy with malice. It was as if they were waiting for her to make a move, to show any sign of weakness. Anya could feel their eyes boring into her, a cold, calculating stare that sent chills down her spine. She took a step back, her foot catching on a loose floorboard. She stumbled back, her hand reaching out for support. Her fingers brushed against the rough, splintered wood of the wall, the sensation grounding her in the moment. Anya could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her fingers brushed against something cold and slimy. The sensation sent a jolt of fear through her, her hand jerking back instinctively. Anya could feel the cold, clammy substance clinging to her skin, a feeling of revulsion washing over her. She took a step back, her foot slipping on the slick floor. With a gasp, she pulled away. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. The room seemed to spin around her, the walls closing in as if trying to suffocate her. Anya could feel the cold sweat trickling down her back, her clothes sticking to her skin. A snake, its scales shimmering in the flickering light, slithered past her feet. The sight of it made her heart race, a feeling of dread settling in her stomach. Anya could see the snake's eyes glinting in the dim light, a cold, calculating stare that sent chills down her spine. She took a step back, her foot slipping on the slick floor. Well, what have we here?" a voice rasped. Anya spun around to face the source of the voice. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dying light, was a figure that sent chills down her spine. Baba Yaga. The hag was impossibly old, her face a wrinkled mask of age and malice. Her long, crooked nose resembled a gnarled branch, and her eyes, two glowing embers, burned with an unholy light. She leaned heavily on a bone-white staff, her knobby fingers wrapped tightly around its top. "You are lost, child," Baba Yaga croaked, her voice like the grinding of stones, "and those who find themselves at my doorstep rarely leave." Anya's voice caught in her throat. She tried to speak, to plead for her life, but no words came out. Fear, raw and consuming, held her captive. Baba Yaga took a step closer, her shadow falling over Anya like a shroud. "Tell me, child," she hissed, her breath hot and foul against Anya's cheek. "What brings you to my humble abode?" Anya shut her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She whispered the only thing she could think of, a desperate plea for mercy. I am lost. Please, let me go." Baba Yaga chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Let you go? But I haven't decided what to do with you yet." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Perhaps you will stay for dinner?" The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The grotesque creatures watched silently, their eyes gleaming in the firelight. Anya felt a sob rise in her throat. She was trapped, at the mercy of a creature of nightmare. The forest held its breath. Within the bone-fenced yard, a hush fell. The only sound was the crackling fire and the low bubbling of the cauldron. Whether Anya found her freedom or met a grim end, only the whispering woods would ever know. The stories never said what became of those who crossed Baba Yaga. Perhaps it was better not to know. The forest held its secrets close, a silent testament to the darkness that lay at its heart. But sometimes, when the wind whispered through the trees, it carried with it a faint, desperate cry, and those who dared to venture into the woods knew better than to follow the sound.
The shadows are restless tonight, and so are we. If you're brave enough, hit that like button. Let us know what you think in the comments, and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories that lurk just around the corner.